All right, gents. So, you know how it would go, like with muscle magazines, especially if you lift for longer than 3 years. Like you'd see the same stuff come up over and over again, and we're like, man, y'all just recycling topics. Like we've seen that arm blaster workout like for the fourth time now, right? Uh, but the longer you do this, right, the more you realize, like, oh, okay, there's really only, I guess, so many like big major topics to talk about, and we're forever not just trying to master how to accomplish these as athletes, but also as coaches, just be better at relaying the message and teaching others how to, I guess, better incorporate these methods, right? And a big one, I think it's a huge one because I know for me when I first started lifting, I didn't think that like gaining weight or gaining like fat was going to be a major part of my success. I just thought, hey, I'm gonna keep lifting, I'm gonna eat well, and I'm gonna continue to improve, and my body's just gonna get better and better slowly. But I didn't fully understand just how, I guess, the magic recomp that happens to just about everyone when you first kick things off, like the first few months. Well, that kind of like runs dry eventually, and there's more efficient ways to and I guess underlooked ways to improve your physique. And by underlooked is what I'm mentioning here is that muscle gain comes via, I guess, taking matter from this extended universe, putting it into yourself, right? Which means you have to eat more than what your body requires. And that's so trippy. Like that's not what people think of when they think of like, hey, I'm gonna get fit, I'm gonna go to the gym and I'm gonna look better. But the truth is, that's one of the last things people master, or most people don't actually fully master that leg. It took me a while, I know that for sure, and we can get into that later. But yeah, wouldn't you guys agree that muscle gaining, weight gain is just a super important part of improving the way you look, and it's often overlooked still to this day.
Yeah, especially for the majority of our listeners, right? Because the majority of our listeners have put some time in the gym, and they've got some years under their belt, and they come to us sometimes because they're wondering, how do I unlock the gains again? The newbie-ish stuff is gone, and all those initial adaptations that we all get when we all first lifting, and it's all easy. That dries up at some point. Yeah. And like you said, it's the overlooked, you know what, you need to eat. You need to eat. You need to put some weight on you, and come to grips with the further you are along in your career, the more important it is, to be in those gaining phases and to make those gaining phases longer than the cutting phases, like your famous orange and blue chart, right, Alberto? The bar graph that you've got where gaining phases are, 48 of the months, and the cutting phases are like 8 of the months or 12 of the months or something like that. Yeah, that's what needs to happen, especially the longer that you do this.
Yeah. But man, it's hard because, I mean, think of it this way. Like, think of physiques that inspired you. Like, I think here's one that from our era was quite typical. Like Rocky, for example, right? Like, especially the last Rocky movie, like he had his little serratus anterior. He had his little abs going. Like, and gaining weight is like, it's taking you in the other direction. It's like, hold up, I'm trying to get like this Rocky dude. Mm-hmm. But like, the little 2-pack I had right here is like kind of, it has to go away. Potentially, like that's hard to comprehend, right? And that was our era. Like imagine now you flip through Instagram and it's like, man, everyone's just like ripped and happy with a full length selfie mirror, just shredded year round, So, and it's a constant beating on your feed. So for, a beginner lifter, a newer lifter, we'll start off with them folks. Like it's hard that, hey, it's like, okay, I'm kind of stuck. Like, first few months were quite rapid in regards to progress, was looking better month by month almost. And now I'm at this weird place where it's like, I don't know what to do next. And I think especially for women, like that's like let's add in, like that's I can't even imagine, right? Like someone telling me like I feel like I'm carrying too much body fat as a female, and it's like you're gonna have to gain a little bit of weight if you really want to maximize the way you look. So yeah, it's hard. It takes discipline, but there's a lot of lessons in that. And those of us who have charted those seas, like we come back with like these tales of great wealth on the other side. Jeffrey?
I was listening to you guys talk, and I was kind of thinking back to when I first started, and I didn't really know much about anything. I didn't know much about nutrition. I didn't know about, hey, I need to be in a gaining phase, cutting phase, none of that stuff. I was just like, hey, let me just start lifting these weights. And at the time, I was just eating mom's cooking. And I think as a kid, I was always kind of a big eater, and I was athletic. So I was never like heavy. I was always an athletic kid. But once I started to lift weights and it was progressive and I had mom's cooking backing me up, like I wasn't losing weight, but I wasn't gaining a ton of weight either. But I think I was just eating just enough to drive those adaptations. And all of a sudden I'm like, whoa, where are these muscles coming from? And then, fast forward 2 or 3 years later, after building a decent physique, a decent base early on without any nutrition knowledge whatsoever, I went off to trade school, and all of a sudden I was a broke college kid, and I couldn't understand why my training was lackluster, and why all of a sudden my body just looked skinny fat. Like I lost a lot of that muscle, and I was like, what's going on here? I just had no concept whatsoever. So I think what's interesting to me is that, like, in the beginning, I had the training thing going really well, even though I wasn't educated on it. Like, I was being progressive with lifting, and I was eating enough without knowing it, but I had no concepts of any of these things.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until later on in hindsight, I'm like, oh, okay. It was the fact that I was eating mom's cooking, and I was obviously in a slight surplus, and I was progressive with my training. And then all of a sudden I'm under eating, not purposely, but it was just happening because I was a broke college kid. Well, all of a sudden, all those gains were just evaporating. So it took me a while to kind of figure out like, oh, you actually need more supply. You need more supply to keep up with that demand. And now, like 35 years later, I understand that principle of supply and demand. Like you have to have the supply outpacing the demand if your goal is to put some muscle on and to change your physique from that perspective. Like, yeah, we can run a cut and you can temporarily look better, but if the ultimate goal is like, I want to have this awesome physique, this end product that's well developed, and at some point you are decently lean, then you have to have those phases like Brad was saying, where you need to spend more time actually, having that supply outpace that demand. So I'm sure we're going to touch a lot about context, but that's kind of the thoughts I was going through. Like it took me back to when I was a kid, like when I first started out, and it was kind of nice to kind of relive those memories right there, because man, I miss my mom's cooking.
The closest thing that triggered memories for me, and that was, so I would play my sports and then I would have breaks, right? And I started lifting at 16, and it's like I'd make this progress, and then the sporting season would come in, it would kill my gains, and my like weight training wasn't the same. And then I kind of started to get the hang of it. I'm like, oh, okay, so I'm just moving far less when I'm out of season, and I'm able to make this progress. So I would, kind of, my abs would get a wee bit blurrier. Like some of the details and the doubts would kind of disappear just a smidge, but I'd progress really well. And I knew that, hey, just on the other side of that, that track season's going to start. You're going to lose those like 20 pounds no matter what you try to do. And you're going to be left off with a better physique. So it wasn't like, kind of like you, it wasn't intentional, but I got to see that play out where it's like, hey, when I was well rested, better fed, I would do better when it came to this bodybuilding thing. And honestly, what really sold me finally, I remember seeing my buddy Gerald Williams. He ended up being an IFBB pro. But I remember his first bulking season where, obviously you're like, I think he was like 18, 19. But seeing him go from a skinny 150-pound kid to like 180 pounds like the very like next year. I mean, he got too fat, but nevertheless, I'm like, this isn't even the same person anymore. like that made me want to specialize and perhaps be okay with undergoing those phases. Because, as much as I saw the benefits, they were still a little uncomfortable once I kind of, saw when I would see that happen in my own physique. Brad, with you, it's a little different because you started lifting in your late 20s, correct? And I seen pictures of you. You were a little softer, like you were getting that like adult life, like I guess dad bod at that point, right? And then you started lifting, and like you just became like like the Brad we know, right? So explain to us how that came to be. I know that you ran into the right people pretty early on. Like you had some better influences, I think, than myself, anyways.
Really early on, like we're talking like in the 90s, right? When I was going to college, we were talking before, kind of off camera, how cringy things were, and I think about how I went about business back then in the 90s, and you want to talk about cringe. I mean, if there's any way that you could do things backwards, that was the way that I kind of did things. The nice thing is I was still basically a beginner, right? So I kind of started, I dabbled with weights, with little cement weights when I was a teenager, but nothing serious. We would just do endless curls and no legs ever, and we would try to do flies on laying on the bed or, something like that with some dumbbells. But when I really first started like seriously lifting, I was well into my 20s. I was going to college. I was working like 2 jobs, and I decided I'm going to start lifting some weights. And that was really my beginner phase. And my early bodybuilding influences were, the IFBB pros. And it wasn't, you don't see IFBB pros in Muscle and Fitness magazine and these magazines when they're off season, right? You see them when they're on stage and they've got abs and they're all cut up and they're all sliced up, and you're reading about how they get into this contest shape. So here I am lifting, and I'm, eating like a dinner and 2 protein shakes a day, and that's it, So here I am lifting on these things, Now, luckily, like we were talking about, I was basically a beginner, and I was still progressing. I remember I was embarrassed to bench press the bar and not at least have 25s, have quarters on the bar, because I could not do 95 pounds essentially for 10 reps. I could only do it for like 3 or 4 reps. I refused. I'm going over there to the Universal, and I'm just going to use that machine there until I can get at least 10 reps with 95 pounds. And I just remember vividly, like every week, I could move that pin down on the Universal at least 2 plates and get 3 sets of 10. Every single week. Those are those newbie adaptations when you can basically have the demand way outpace the supply and you can still progress. You know what I mean? And I did that wrong for a long time, you guys, a long time. And even as an early bodybuilder, I did the exact opposite of what your chart talks about. I would spend the majority of my time with the orange bars, dieting, and a minimal amount of time with the blue bars gaining, you know what I mean? And it really was not until, I met you guys, I was kind of in this perpetually lean state, kind of like we see on Instagram, from like 2006 until like 2009, and every year I got more shredded. But at the same time, every year I would just seem like I got a little bit smaller, But yeah, it wasn't until 2009 and 2010 when I kind of met you guys that I started realizing there's something to this eating in this off season of the way that it's supposed to go, and not purposely holding my weight down and, eating like straight protein diets, of 400 grams of protein and 30 grams of fat, Yep, I told you cringy stuff, right? That's kind of what I always did. And so, yeah, I just, now that I've come to the realization of that, I try to do everything I can to keep people from making my mistakes, because I think about what I did early on and where I am now, and I think about you guys and what you did early on, and where you guys are now. And I'm like, damn, I missed out on a lot of what I could have gained, you know, in those early years.
So you know what I did, Brad? And I don't mean to cut you off, Berto, but coming off, like following up on my start, like when I got skinny fat, so I deteriorated a little bit. So getting back into it, like, okay, I need to turn this around. It was 6 days a week training. Cause I was like you, Brad, I'm looking at the magazines, I'm following these guys. I'm like, oh, okay, I got to get in the gym 6 days a week. And, you know, for example, chest, I'll be doing like 4, 5 different exercises, doing like 3, 4, 5 sets a piece. So just doing a lot of volume, but I was still eating like a can of green beans for lunch because I was still the broke college kid. So I'm trying to basically do more training on like barely any food. And I couldn't figure out why I wasn't looking like I did in high school. Like, what's going on here? My body's not responding. I just didn't have the knowledge to understand the big picture. Like, I'm just well underfed. So the demand was far outpacing the supply. And the fact I jacked my training volume up made matters worse. And I saw this dude in the gym and he had these tree trunks for legs. At least I thought they were tree trunks at the time. And I was just like, I went up to him like, hey man, how do you get legs like that? And he's like, hey, come to the gym on Wednesday morning, 10 o'clock, and we'll do a leg session together. And that's where I learned Dorian Yates, Mike Mincer's HIIT, because that's basically what he followed. Not to say that that's like the best way to train or anything like that, but what he ended up doing for me without really telling me in so many words was that he said, okay, we're going to train 3 days per week. We're going to do minimal exercises, but we're going to go super intense and be progressive. So it's almost like what I was doing in high school, just a little less volume. It's so, you know, progressive overload. And he said, I want you to eat as much food as you can. Like that was his only recommendation nutritionally. So that's what I did. And I remember I was kind of estimating those calories. It's in the neighborhood of like 4,000 to 5,000 calories. So I went probably from maybe 1,500 calories a day all the way up to 4,000 to 5,000 calories. Less training, so there's more recovery, still intense training. So all what ended up happening was my supply was far outpacing the demand now. Over 3 months' time, I went from 160 pounds up to 190. Yeah, there was a lot of fat accumulation, but there was also a lot of muscle accumulation. Like everything I lost, I recouped and then some. And strength levels went through the roof. And I was on the path to making progress. The only downside was because I made such fast improvements, I was like, holy shit, I just found the holy grail of bodybuilding. So I got sucked into like, it was almost like a cult following, right? Like I got sucked into that. And it basically kind of had me just one-sided, you know, one mind the whole time. For a long time I was following that. But in a nutshell, looking back in hindsight, it was just simply just making sure that the supply was outpacing that demand. And I think in a nutshell, that's what we need to build muscle. You know, whether we're new or intermediates or advanced, you still have to have that in play, like the principle of that in play. Of course, when you're a beginner, you can have greater surpluses versus someone who's advanced. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're just going to get fat. Because if I had eating 4,000 or 5,000 calories now, yeah, I'd be like Berto's 250 back in the day. It probably wouldn't look too pleasant or feel too comfortable. But anyways, I wanted to touch on that because you made me go back in history a little bit more with your story there, Brad.
Yeah, I think it's crazy how, like you said, my 250, it's like, even when I was 250, because I had like enough muscle, like if I got under the right lights and I flex my abs, it's like, there they go, you know, like
it didn't look terrible.
No, it looked like I played linebacker somewhere, you know, right. So I think, you know, everyone kind of wants it now, right? And that's the one thing that you learn from bodybuilding. It's like, hold up, like, you know, like it's not like this for when it comes to bodybuilding, and it's not like this that way for a lot of things in life. But eventually it does get to the point where you carry enough muscle that it kind of has a way of you know, contouring what, say, 20% body fat looks like on a male, and what like body fat somewhere in the low 30s might look like on a female lifter. But you have to go through enough of those phases to actually build enough muscle so that you can benefit from that. because I think that is the issue. You have some folks that are they're a little bit on the under muscled side, like kind of that tweener phase. They describe themselves as skinny fat, although I'm sure it's not that bad. But we're always harshest with ourselves when it comes to those sort of things. And they'll tell you something along the lines like, well, of course, look, it's easy for you to do it because you had 20% body fat. You still look like you lift, right? But I mean, our first bulking phase wasn't that way. It's like, I know for sure, like mine's got progressively better, and we'll just say that, hey, that 190 just started to look a little bit better, like each and every time I cycled through there. But yeah, like a lot of things, it's going to take a few soakings for you to really, benefit from the efforts, from your time spent on that. And yeah, it's those first few rocky phases that I think keep a lot of people from, I guess, investing enough time into gaining, which, again, super important part of maximizing your body composition. It's just not really sold to you as one of like the details when you first start,
For some people, it's just a little uncomfortable. When you start gaining, it's like, it's not like you look better right away.
No,
like you're talking about, you look worse in a sense. So it's hard for people to like roll with it because they're like, oh man, I'm actually looking worse. This feels like we're doing something wrong here.
Yeah.
When your reality is you're doing something right. And, when you do get to, let's say, a little bit more of a heavier settling weight, that's going to look better over time the more you train, like you talked about. And it's kind of, again, takes me back to when I went from 160 to 190. I looked jacked. Like it looked obviously softer, but I still looked good. Like you were talking about, like the muscle was carrying it well. Well, my bright idea was, 190, let's go to 200. So I kept force feeding to go to 200. And when I got to 200, I was like, okay, I'd gone a little too far. So now it's like really soft. But over the years, like I've been 200 multiple times now over multiple off seasons. And some of those off seasons, actually 200 look pretty damn good in comparison to where it was the very first time I touched that, back that was like in the early 90s when that happened. So yeah, sometimes you got to be patient. Like you got to let the body weight creep up. You're going to get a little softer, but a lot of the magic happens there. Like performance, recovery, all those things are just a little bit better when you're a little bit softer. I just had an athlete today checked in, and we dieted down into the high 160s. We came out of it, and he's like in the mid 170s, and he prefers the low 170s because it looks a little more pleasing. But part of the check-in was, hey, I'm hitting some PRs. My performance is going really good.
Yeah.
So I'm like, hey, you know what? We're actually, it's like a nice happy medium because one, you're benefiting from the extra weight in the weight room, but you look pretty good at 175. It doesn't look that bad. You can still see the contours of the musculature. You look like you lift. So this is a nice place to hang around with.
Well, and that's probably the folks that we need to talk to about now is people that have lifted for a while, and how do they get moving on their gains that they want and the increase in the muscularity, right? Because once those initial adaptations are done, and like you said, Jeff, they don't look as good gaining. That's right about the beginning of when they're going to start to look good. And like you said, Berto, they're going to start seeing the contour of the muscle and how it fills out body fat better.
Yeah.
But again, you have to be supplying, more than you're demanding. And one of the things that really, really changed my mind, especially for advanced lifters, was, I think it was late 2019. In fact, I've got it right here. Let me just pull it up here. Our good Dr. Helms made a good post on the energy surplus required to maximize skeletal muscle. And the recommendations here are pretty, let's just say they're pretty robust. But they were backed up by some other very, very smart people that were saying basically, you can eat up to like 1,000 calorie surplus a day to maximize the muscular gains that you get from your training. And obviously we don't recommend that, In fact, I think Eric even says in his post that, he doesn't recommend that. But it was a big light bulb for me. And it made me realize that and I'm not alone thinking this, because there's a lot of people out there that still think this. And I talk about this in I want to say our last podcast, entitled Just Keep Lifting. People don't train unless everything is perfect, unless they know that they can take all their supplements and they can take their protein powder and they can take their creatine and they're counting their macros and they're all their calories are in place. Unless all that is good, the training is all for naught, and those studies right there were kind of an eye opener to me. It was like, you know what? None of that has to be in place. I mean, ideally, yes, you want to get your protein in there, but as long as you're in an energy surplus and you're training, you're going to be gaining the muscle under there, and you're going to get what we just talked about. That muscle is going to start filling out that body fat, and you're sort of going to start get those muscular contours, very akin to our powerlifting and our strongman brothers, right? They all arguably are pretty high body fat, but it looks pretty damn good on them at the same time with all of that muscle,
Hey 3DMJers, this is Andrea Valdez here to tell you all about the 3DMJ Vault VIP membership. You can get all access to every single course we've ever made for just $12.99 per month for a limited time at 3dmjvault.com. Until recently, you could only purchase one course at a time at the full price, which currently can cost up to $68. But now, with this new VIP membership, you can have full access to everything we've ever made for one low monthly rate. That means you can watch all the videos and get all of the document downloads for courses like the Lifting Library, Transitioning Away from Tracking, The Godfather's Guide to Posing, our full Fat Loss Q&A series, and so much more. Again, that's all 13 video courses for only $12.99 per month for a limited time. As with everything we make in the vault, the price will increase as we add more courses and content over time. So the sooner you subscribe, the more money you'll save every month. Go to 3dmjvault.com, select the VIP membership, and sign yourself up today.
What's interesting is you see a pretty jacked powerlifter, a little bit of fluff, right? You don't go, oh, that dude's fat or that gal's
or
fat.
that dude's obese.
You're like, damn, they look pretty stout and they're pretty damn strong. But when we're thinking about bodybuilding, it's almost like it's frowned upon to have a little bit of extra fluff there. So I just think that's an interesting perspective to kind of think about.
Yeah, and I've kind of gone the other way anymore. I've kind of tried to get my off-season bodybuilders.
You made me snort. That was a good one.
And how rare is it that I do that, right? But yeah, I try to get them to get into their mind, and even some of their close, relatives and significant others. I like to try to get them to the point to where they all feel they're fat. Keep training. That's the most important part. But I try to kind of push them a little bit, and I don't rush them. I say, okay, you know what? You're feeling a little uncomfortable. I think we can go more. Your significant other thinks you can go more. Relatives think you can go more. Let's run a little cut as a little bridge, like we talked about in, I think it's the podcast Mini Cuts, Not So Fast, right? Little 2 week, maybe a 1 month little mini cut, but then we start going again, And one of the things that stands out in my mind, Berto, was something that you talked about in one of our meetings that I really bought into. That when you can get that body fat a little bit on the higher side, there's a little bit of recomp that's going off of there. And I think if I remember right, and you certainly correct me if my thinking is wrong here, but you were talking about how there's all this potential energy and all these calories in the form of body fat on your body that you can kind of start pulling from and start getting some of this. You're not going to really necessarily see it because there's a lot of fluff on top of you, but I really bought into that. And a lot of my bodybuilders are really reaping the benefits of that now. But yeah, just kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's funny you say that about relatives, just family members, because that's just something you have to get used to. Is that people are just gonna always have an opinion about your body composition once you become a like recomp enthusiast, aka bodybuilder, right? It's like they know when you're gaining. They're like, oh, now you're too thin, and it's just they're never happy, right? So, but so that's why my gym is like my saving grace, because like it's like everyone understands. Like, hey, if I look like I'm about to just pass out at any moment, it's because I'm doing really good. It's all intentional. But yeah, man. So shoot, so many things, wonderful things happen at a higher body fat. I think I'll get to the recomp thing, but I feel that when we're talking about like, I guess kind of marrying this into the rest of your life, like creating those like good habits, like that happens at higher body fat levels, not when you're a little bit hungrier than you you like to be, right? And the majority of us, it's like, hey, we love this hobby, we want to do this for a long, long time, but every so often it does clash with the rest of my life. And it's usually easier to kind of figure this stuff out when, when you're like at the higher end of, I guess, your settling point. You can kind of play around with how much flexibility you can have when it comes to maybe tracking or what general system works best for you, but also doesn't drive the people around you crazy. It's a good time to experiment with other training modalities as well, right? It's just a great environment for a lot of things. And one of those, yes, it's like the body recomp that everyone wants. I think most people who want to recomp, it's like, hey, do you want to cut, bulk, or recomp? Most people are like, well, I'm 12% body fat. I think if I could gain muscle and like keep this body fat, maybe even lower it a little bit, that would be great. It's like, well, I think we'd all pick that if it were that straightforward, but it doesn't really work that way. So
what do you say? Sorry to cut you off. What do you say to those people that will say, "Oh, well, I wanna get down to 12% before I gain again"? They in their mind, they're not. You can tell they're not happy with the current look because they feel like they're too fluffy. So it's always like, I'm scared to gain weight. So, hey, let me cut first so I can gain weight. And in a sense, it's like, well, why don't you just stay where you're at and just let's train and put some more muscle on? Because like we talked about earlier about the muscle is going to look better the bigger it is, right? Even if you have a little bit extra body fat there, you're going to look better with more muscle. So why spend more time away from the bigger picture and diet down from, let's say 17% or 16% body fat down to this arbitrary 12%, 10%, and then come back up? Like, what would be the point of that? Like, what would you tell someone who's wanting to do that first?
And that's like such red flag like talk to me. Like, I need to get to this body, because usually most people don't even know what that looks like.
Right.
Like to start, right? It usually just means like a general level of happiness, of leanness that would make me happy. Like, but you know how it is. It's like you just want a little bit more. It's like, let's just say you do get them to that body fat. They're still not going to like to, the whole turning around at that point. It's like, well, there go your abs, right? Or whatever landmarks in your body you wanted to be able to see. So, yeah, I think because generally in my experience, it has been a big red flag when people are like, I need to get to this weight. I need to get to this body fat. We have a big discussion usually about their dieting history. And more often than not, it's been a lot of failed attempts to get to 12% body fat. And it's like, hey, if we spend some time away from like this trauma zone, get you back over here, develop some really good habits, which again, they're easier to build at higher body fat levels. Maybe you have less resistance next time on the way down. And you look better than you would have this time anyways, So that's usually how that convo goes. Because usually when they say that, they've tried this many times and they've yet to reach their goal of that magical body fat.
Yeah. Because I have one guy in particular that he's very adamant about cutting first before going back up. And what's interesting is never really pushed his body weight up. So that was kind of unknown territory. So it was almost like you said, it's like kind of just wanting to go towards a comfort zone, what he thought maybe was going to be a happy place. And I kind of knew like if I didn't roll with it, that he probably would just do his own thing or go elsewhere. So I'm like, all right, let me just, cut him down, do it properly. So that way it's done right. Well, I mean, long story short, we get there down to where he wanted to go, and he realized like, I don't have no muscle. There's no muscle here. So it's like, okay, then he had a lot more buy-in to the gain, and he actually committed to a full-blown gaining phase and went way up out of his comfort zone. And long story short, we came back down again, and I mean, we looked better at the same body weight on the way down versus the first time. Gained a couple pounds of muscle, not a huge amount, but there was significant progress visually. But sometimes, people just have to experience things firsthand before you kind of get that buy-in. As much as, we can, our collective experience, right? Like we can tell someone, hey, this is for your own good. But sometimes, you just have to kind of walk people through the experiences to really get it to sink in. But I mean, now, like we actually took him through a cut, went through a proper gaining phase, went through another cutting phase. In a sense, now he knows how to manipulate his body composition. Like he's really good at it. And he's got those skills that you talked about, Berto, because on the way up, a lot of those things he was doing with family and all that, he was able to duplicate it on the way down. So I think it's pretty important that people go through these experiences.
No, I agree. Like sometimes you let them make their mistake, and I think what you do is they're experiencing that. It's like you're breaking it down for them. Like, okay, this is what I think is happening. Because we've made all of them, so we can call them out as they happen. And sometimes, it first of all you gain their trust, but also they tend to absorb, and they're able to put into words what's actually going on right now with their bodybuilding. But I agree. Sometimes it's like, all right, well, I guess, all right, smoke the whole pack of cigarettes. I don't think Dad's actually ever did that with the kids, but it's one of those deals, and I'll supervise, right? Man, it's just the majority of your bodybuilding, like realistically, is going to be spent at body fat levels that maybe that they're not, I guess, your photo shoot ready, And I think when it's all said and done, when I look at my highlight film, like honestly, like a good chunk of the highlights happen on that end, just as much as on the other side, So I know that for sure with myself, I'm always like a few PRs away from like, if I'm having like these like bad like body image days, away from like feeling like pretty good at it's like I put down the dumbbells and I'm like, oh yeah, this is worth it.
I should be the host because I got a couple questions for you guys. So let me do this one first. So if you guys can recall your own history, like talking about your training, hitting PRs, like you're just like when your lifts are at their best, where's the body fat percentage at? Or where are you guys at? You guys are off season, right? You're a little on the softer side.
Yeah.
Like how many times have you been running a cut? You're like, oh, I hit a squat PR or a deadlift PR or whatever PR it is. It's like, to me, when I've gone through my preps, it's very minimal where I'll see like these big like training highlight reels. It's more when I'm like 190, 200 pounds is when I'm seeing these big lifts. And when I'm thriving in the off season, if I do the off season correctly, performance is elevated. And when I come back down, when I dive into a prep or a cutting phase, I do it properly. That's where my physique has always yielded the best look. So is that similar to you guys? Did you guys see?
Yeah, I remember the first time that I really started making strength gains was after my 2008 season when I got defeated by our good Alberto Nunez here for my pro card. Luckily, I ended up winning it later that year where Alberto was not there.
You took it out on Luke Ellis, didn't you? Right? Yeah.
Our good friend Luke Ellis, yeah. But I remember I was not 200 pounds, but I was on my way up. Here was kind of the important part. I was, Berto, you weighed, I think, 153, and I weighed 150 155 or 158 or something like that. And I was on my way up from that I started getting my biggest strength gains, and all of my early highlights were during that period of time. And I think I did my first powerlifting meet in 2009 on the way up. I was going up from 155 and I think I got up to 177, and that was my famous 450 pound deadlift that I had gotten for the very first time with the flashes in my eyes. I looked like Zool from Ghostbusters. But yeah, that was on the way up, from that body weight, And yeah, a lot of the highlights that I got after that were usually on the way up from being, lean to, kind of the kickoff of my off season. And Berto, I've seen a lot of your highlights. I've watched a lot of your highlights, and I kind of know when they happened.
Yeah, no, I have to be over 180. And if anything happens in the 170s, it's because I was able to get really strong at the higher body weights. And, it's like eventually you know how to take down that strength and keep performance, and you get a little bit more sophisticated with the dieting. But it all happens on that end. And I've tried to, create the same amount of progress at those lighter body weights, and it just doesn't work the same. It definitely doesn't work the same. So, and honestly, I kind of go back and forth, like which one feels better, like a good PR or looking shredded and putting up a picture and getting all the likes. It's just like, I don't know, like to me, the PRs, it's like I can still feel those like through my body. Like right now, I can think of certain days where I'm like, oh my God, these dumbbells are going up. Like it's an amazing feeling, and you don't need anyone there to tell you that it's fantastic because you're experiencing it yourself. So yeah, I don't know. Both sides are yummy in their own way.
How do you guys know, like, as far as like where to cap someone in their body weight? Like, because we're talking about gaining, but how much is too much? Like, where do we put that ceiling? How do we cap it? What do we think about with that?
Yeah, I think about a lot, really, because there's a ton of context there, right? A ton of context. Because, I mean, naturally, if we're got a show that we're going to be thinking about, when's that show going to happen? We got to make sure that, we're within kind of that striking distance of where we want to kind of start our prep positioning. It makes no sense to prep for a show, say in August, when you're right now 55 pounds over stage weight, or what we project to be your stage weight. The amount of muscle that you're going to lose on the way down is going to be significant, and you're not going to be very happy with your training performance. So yeah, if you're a bodybuilder, when's your show? We're going to have to cap this at some point. I have a gentleman that I'm going to be getting ready for a show in October, and we only are going to be able to gain from now to where he's at right now, which is arguably, I think, about 167 pounds. We're only going to be able to gain to about 173. And at 173, he's going to be about 10, 12% away from stage weight. We're going to need to start dieting back down again. So that's a cap for that particular person. But then another person, if they're not competing until 2024, I might try to push them to the point to where, what, let's get you uncomfortable here. Let's get you where you think you're fat. And then maybe we'll run a little cut. And then let's get you to where, your relatives think you're a little bit fat. When your mama says you're a little bit fat, because
I don't know about that one. Because my mom would overfeed me, and I have to tell my mom, okay, I can only eat so many plates of spaghetti, Mom.
Exactly, and that's why I want your mama to say that you're getting fat.
maybe your brother or your sister, but I don't know about moms or grandmas. We'll leave them out of the loop.
But yeah, if it's a ways off, I try to get people a little bit on the uncomfortable side to where they feel like, yeah, they're a little bit fat. And I mean, even people that are thinking, okay, I want to do this bodybuilding thing, and they send us their pictures. And if I see abs, they're gaining weight. I'm going to try like hell to talk them into gaining weight right now. I don't care if they want to get down to this body fat first before they're going to go up. I'm going to try like hell, because like Berto said, that's a red flag to me. That's contradicting what you want to do in the long term, And I'll kind of somewhat tell the same story I did here with you guys, you know, and kind of share a little bit of experience and kind of talk them out of, give them the reasons why I'm trying to talk them out of doing it. And then also I'll get my little crystal ball out and I'm like, you know what, this is what my crystal ball is telling me right now. And my crystal ball is not always right, but a lot of times it is. You're going to get down to that body weight. Your abs are going to look great and you're going to be disgusted with how skinny your arms and your legs look. That's what my crystal ball is telling me right now. And that's what I want to avoid because that is contradictory to what is your long-term goal of getting on stage in 2025. And like you guys said, sometimes you just got to let them experience it. You know, you got to let them smoke that whole pack of cigarettes, turn green, throw up before they realize the smoking is bad for them, you know? But yeah, tons and tons of context there. And hopefully that's kind of two opposite ends of the spectrum, you know, as far as where I cap people and where they're going to get their body fat to.
Hey, you guys were kids in the 60s. Did they really do that?
In the 60s?
I'm not that old. I was born in 71. Come on, Berto.
Yeah, almost 60s, but no, man.
Man, shoot, I'd say I'll kind of how you push with leanness on the way down. You know, it's like, okay, maybe, hey, you want, you look like your favorite, Gymshark model in his little underwear. I guess you'll go, but it's like, we're not ready for that yet, man. You know, like, let's go through a few of these fat loss phases and you'll get closer every single time. I think sometimes, like, on the way up, you have to maybe negotiate that with them a little bit and see, especially if they're kind of getting in their own way, right? If you're like, I have a feeling you're just one of those folks that functions better, like, above 18% body fat. Like, everything's just going to click. You know, then maybe I won't get him there the first time because, like, you could get adherence problems sometimes on the way up where it's like, I don't think you're eating all your food, like, right? So, I think you play around with that a little bit. You bring him up, you bring him down. But one thing I think I've changed my mind on, like, in recent years is I do cycle through cutting and gaining phases a little bit more rapidly because almost regardless of where we're going, it's like, this ends at a certain point, right? At micro level, like you're dieting, it's like, I know that I have my refeeds coming up. So I'm going to work really hard these next 2 days, hit my cardio, not, weigh my food the way I should be. It gets you through that. So sometimes, like, it's, say on the way up, you're like, okay, well, man, like, I'm kind of uncomfortable. This is 5 pounds heavier than I've ever been. But I know that I have a cutting phase like in a month. So let me maximize this. Having I think a little bit more frequency and letting them practice a little bit more on both ends helps adherence.
I think it's a good idea, like, to take people out of their comfort level or to go places where they've never been before. If, let's say, this person, maybe you think their top end is 190 where they're going to be most comfortable, but you push them to 195, then you truly know if in fact 190 or 195 is a better place for them. But if you're just throwing some arbitrary numbers in ahead of time and sticking to that and going just by, like, whatever their emotions are, like, sometimes you have to just push people up a little bit higher.
Yeah.
And you'll learn, like, okay, oh shit, 195 is actually too soft right now anyways for this person. So yeah, you have the cutting phase to go back on. But the next time you go up, at least you have a little bit more clarity on where you can take them or where they might need to be, because you're going to know at 195 what their performance was doing, what their recovery was doing, how they were handling life, how they were handling just how they felt in that body. So there's just a lot to be learned, but you ain't gonna be able to learn if you don't take yourself there in the first place. So just a little bit of trial and error there can go a long ways to help set up the future.
Yeah, as a coach, you're doing those two things a lot. You're kind of, when it's more than what they can handle, it's like you're there to tell them, like, I think, I'm not saying you can't at some point handle this, but right now, maybe it's not the time. But then also the other way around, it's like you're also there to, like, hey, I'm gonna nudge you a little bit further than you would have on your own. And it's funny because usually you nudge them a little bit further. My experience with the bodybuilding coach, on the way up, you push them a little bit further than they like when it comes to weight gain. And it's usually on the way down that you're kind of like, I think you're going too far, man. Like, I really don't think you need striated glutes for your friend's wedding. True story, actually. True story.
Gotta look good in that suit.
I'm not saying names, but true story. So yeah. You're saying, Brad?
Well, I was just going to say, sometimes you learn if you can even get to the body weight that the coach is trying to get you at. I mean, there's been more than one time when I've tried to get a bodybuilder to an uncomfortable point to where they might feel that they're a little bit fat, and they can't get there. They can't eat that much food. They can't be any more inactive, because of how their life is. And they kind of learn, oh man, you know what? I really can't get fat. I can't get to the point to where I was thinking I would be fat, and I mean, I to be honest with you, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and sometimes I will just let people live there. And this kind of circles back to your question earlier, Jeff, about where do you cap that? Sometimes you just find that cap, accidentally. Well, coach, I've never been 203 pounds before, much less 205, and we find out your cap is like 198. You can't possibly eat any more food, and here I am telling you to eat spoonfuls of peanut butter and, protein in your tub of ice cream and, et cetera, to get you to gain weight. You know what? Here's our cap. Let's just ride here and train until that strategic point down the road when we do our mini cut, or we start our pre-prep positioning, cut, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You learn what you learn. You know what? I can't get as fat as I thought I could.
Well, I mean, that person at 198, I mean, obviously if they can't eat any more food, they're well fed.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Chances are the body fat's higher. They're well fed. So I'm sure their training's probably just going just fine. So they can probably hang out that body weight and still make gains.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, you think, supply and demand. Supply is definitely outpacing the demand. So you're in an environment to continue to make some gains.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times too, like some people with the arbitrary numbers, they want to like I want to hit 200 pounds or, 180, whatever the number is. Like they try to force it when maybe they shouldn't. Because I think oftentimes too is like when we hit a number, it's either like I want to keep gaining or I want to go the other way. There's never a holding pattern in a sense. And oftentimes when we hit the number that we're trying to get in the gaining, it's automatically people will go, okay, now I'm going to cut. It's like, no, just hang out. Just hang out there at that body weight, because now you're in that well-fed state. You got the supply there. Take advantage of that and strike while the iron is hot. Give it some time, a few months, then run a cutting phase. So those are the scenarios I kind of see with some people. It's more like on-off switch. They have to be doing one thing or another, but they never think of like, hey, this just could be a dimmer switch.
Mm-hmm.
Just keep the light kind of lightly dimmed right now, and just keep doing your thing.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, when we do kind of hit that point, I like to run a couple different periods, different cycles of training during that period of time. Once we're at that new kind of PR body weight, I guess you might call it. If a person's never really done a true strength cycle with some fairly heavy loads and low reps, let's do it. Let's do a cycle of that. Let's do a couple blocks, of just that, and find out what your strength really is, and maybe it's something that you haven't done before. If it's the opposite, let's drive volume up here. Let's do some sort of a scheme here to get your volume really, really high with maybe sub-maximal loads, and run that for a block or two, and then run another strength block, and let's just stay here the whole time and just kind of watch what happens. And oftentimes people are it's kind of like the people that are really happy with their weight gain until they see the damn number that the DEXA analysis spit out. They're like, yeah, I didn't think that I would look this good at 195 pounds. And I'm really glad that I put on this 10, 15 pounds of body weight. Let's see how much I put on, and they go jump underneath that damn DEXA machine, and they found out they gained 70% fat and 30% muscle. And it's like, you know what? You were really happy until you learned about that number, So let's just train here for a while, and let's just kind of watch and see what happens. And a lot of times they're pretty darn happy with how they come out, not only looking, but also performing, They find out how strong they are. They find out how much volume they can handle.
Ooh, I hate those numbers. I mean, those, I don't know. I'm a bodybuilding coach, so it's my eye over anything else.
Exactly. Pictures, video. Yeah.
How big's your
yeah.
arm? Berto, how big's your arm? Like
It's not very impressive, man. Not very impressive at all. I don't
get that a
disclose.
lot. Like whether
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
I have an 18-inch arm in the off season because I'm fatter. When I'm dieted down, it's more like 17. Like the number, like, okay, you hear 18, you're like, that's more impressive. But actually the 17-inch arm is more impressive because visually it's more appealing.
Yeah.
It's those numbers like you, they kind of frustrate me in a way from a bodybuilding perspective because it's all visuals.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's all visuals. Like what you see in the mirror is how it's going to make you feel. Like if you like what you're seeing, obviously you're going to be happy regardless of what the body weight is or what your circumferences are measuring. So those numbers to me, it's a pet peeve. But I will say when I was first starting out, way back when I got to find this log. Cause I used to have a little notebook and I would measure my arms and all that. And I have all the measurements. I would keep track of that. I would measure like once a week, like really, like you're not going to see a whole lot once a week. But when you're first starting out, like a lot of us tend to gravitate towards those numbers. When in reality it's more like it's more visual than what we should be paying attention to.
Yeah, I remember the very first time that I did one of those before and after transformation contests. You know, what was it? I think it was Bill Phillips, the
Body for Life guy.
Body for Life. Yeah, Body for
EAS?
Life. The one that I did was not that one. It was actually through AST, but I will never forget. Every week, people were coming in and they're like, gosh, Brad, your arms are looking bigger. You know, you look like you're putting on some good size. And I'm like, well, I'm actually losing a little bit of weight here, you know, because I'm doing this whole thing. And I was real happy with, you know, all these people, their compliments that I was getting on my arms. And then I went and measured them and they shrunk like about, I think, a quarter of an inch or something like that. But they had looked so much better, you know, and I'm like, how can that be? The numbers always screw things up, I swear.
Well, for the weight gain, like that's how it is. It's like I think sometimes we take into consideration maybe our pre-lifting body weights. It's like we know when we get to 150 pounds, when we get to 200 pounds, it's like that was not a good look for you. But shoot, 5 or so years into like strength training, that's going to be a little different. You know, on another note, like what you said about holding on to higher weights, I think that's good practice just because it lets you live in that suit a little bit longer. And, you know, you'll see that, hey, I'm all right. Even when I'm at this body weight, I'm still a pretty decent person. I hit some PRs. I'm a little bit more fun to be around. Life is a little bit, just it has a little bit more, I guess, less pre-planning. Like, and that's just, I think, good for you if you want to do this for a long time. But yeah, truth be told, like if you want to excel at this and maximize your physique, whether you want to be on the stage or not, learning to gain weight, I'd say it's absolutely just as important as the fat loss side of it. But people don't pay it nearly as much attention as they should.
Yeah, and ever since, Berto, you talked about that whole recomp at higher body fat. You a lot of times you have a lot better eye for things than I do, and you tend to interpret visual things better than I do. But now that I've actually kind of seen it on my folks, it's kind of hard to explain. But you can kind of see just like minute changes, and it's mostly in video when I'm seeing them move and I'm seeing them lift, you know, and things like that. I don't know. I think it would be really cool to have. We'll have to stick Eric on that. You know, Eric, your next mass assignment is to scour the evidence for people that are recomping at 27% body fat while they're training.
I mean, yeah, there's a point where I don't necessarily gain weight anymore, but I'll stick there, you know, mostly because it's hard to gain weight. And, you know, I put on a pair of pants that I haven't put on in like 6 weeks. And I'm like, ooh, like these feel just a tad bit looser and I weigh about the same, maybe a smidge more. So, so yeah, when, you know, your body has plenty of stored resources and, you know, training is going well and you have all the other things figured out, all the other moving parts, some really, really good things happen. So yeah.
I feel like we need to talk about the majority of the people that are out there that are like, you know what? I got no problem putting weight on. I can put the food bag down and I can just keep eating. And, you know, if I'm doing my training, you know, how fast is too fast, you know, and kind of like we talked about before, where should we be capping things out? And this is kind of going back to what I was talking about earlier, where this light bulb has kind of turned on, and a lot of people that I do consulting with or that I'm chatting with on the gram or whatever, it's like they have now got the okay, the light bulb is turned on. They've got the okay to realize that, okay, you know what? I'm gaining weight, but coach says that I'm making my best gains right now as long as I'm training. And they're not worried about everything being perfect in order to reap the benefit of their training, you know? They're reaping the benefit of their training just kind of being in that caloric surplus. But yeah, what do we tell those people that are like, you know what, you want me to gain 10 pounds next month? I can do it.
Yeah. Honestly, I think that's most people. I think most people, one of their concerns and one of the reasons they're apprehensive with gaining is because most people, they tend to perhaps say, they self-identify as like, I gain maybe a little bit faster than I would like. Right? So, you know, like when you give them X amount of percent of body weight that you have to gain each month, to them, like it's nerve-wracking, not because they don't think they can't make that happen. It's because they're afraid of overshooting. Mm-hmm. So, and I think that's I mean, right? That's the majority of the people we work with.
I feel
usually,
like that's
right?
I feel like that's the majority of people. Exactly. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, and how many people do you? I think I've talked to one person out of all of those people that are like, Coach, if you want me to gain 10 pounds next month, I got no problem with it. I'll do it. And I'll be
Please
like,
don't.
well, you know what? If you're okay with it, let's do it. You know, let's see. But that's the only time, you know, out of hundreds of people that I've gotten that, you know.
Yeah. You know, I think it's I don't know. It's up to us to kind of assign like what they're capable of, right? It's like a lean gaining. Like your gaining phases should get leaner and better as time goes on. So for me, usually it's like I'll give them like just ranges to work with. Like, okay, this gaining phase is going to be a range of months. It could be 6 months. It could be 8 months. Either one is fine. And not, you know, like if we only make it to 6, that's okay. You know, if we maybe get to 8 and we're like, hey, we can do another month. Well, that's fantastic too. And then, so, you know, you give them ranges with the time and then ranges with the weight gain. And I think once you give that to people, they don't worry as much about like, oh shoot, you know, February was pretty fast because right around the corner came March, and March was maybe a little bit slower than what all these experts online you know tell them, right? So I think being more pliable in that sense is helps people like be at ease a little bit more.
I think there needs to be a big picture game plan in place. Having the ranges there builds the flexibility within that. But I think we're promoting to like people to gain weight, but we're not advocating, hey, just gain a bunch of excessive weight and let go of like good habits. And because personally, that's what ends up happening to me a lot. Like if I get into a longer off season, then life just kind of creeps up. You know, I'm enjoying life probably a little too much. Bodybuilding goes down on the back burner just a little too far. Then before you know it, I'm like, damn, I'm 206 pounds and my body composition does not look all that pleasant. And when you do that, then it takes time to kind of get yourself back into the structure that you need to be in, and that means more time. So all of a sudden these timelines that you maybe had initially need to be extended out. So, and you miss out on maybe some things. Like I've missed out on shows with you guys actually because of this. And I was like, oh, I have to do later show dates just because, you know, I blew it more in the off season. I've seen this with people's off season. They just get complacent. You know, so I think it's important to have that big structure in place, but have flexibility built in, like you said, Berto, ranges. So there is you can still have some flexibility and variety in your life, but you don't let go of like your bodybuilding goal in a sense.
Yeah. And you'll get better every time. Like you get closer and closer to what is optimal. Like I think, maybe for me it's really only been 10 years. I think that I've been able to master like what happens like on both sides of that ping pong table.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because every time you get into a gaining phase or an off season, life context usually changes. It's like, it's never static. So there's always new variables to work with. So it's a ongoing learning process, with all this. But I just wanted to throw that out there, that because we're talking about gaining, I don't want to make it look like, hey, just gain 10 pounds just because you want to gain 10 pounds. It's not what we're kind of saying.
Yeah. And a lot of times when I'm doing consultations with folks, I'm spending a lot of time with like plan B, or if this happens, do this. I spend a lot of time on that because I'm like you guys, I'm flexible with our timelines, and I'm like, okay, right now, here's our goal, gain weight. It's as simple as that, right? But here's the deal, I want you to be probably, I want you to gain 15 pounds over these next 4 months, okay? And if you're there too soon, I want you to do this, and sometimes I'll even play out scenarios, and I'll have to kind of probe and ask them, what's life going to look like, 3-4 months down the road when you make this goal? Are you going to be, because we work with a lot of college students, and college students are a lot more active a lot of times when they're in school as compared to when they're back home with their folks, you know what I mean? And so I'll kind of give them this, okay, if this happens, do this. Here's plan B if you get there too fast. If you can't get there, But yeah, I kind of give them this loose timeline, and if we check in down the road in about 4 months and we're not there, and they've already kind of exhausted plan B and plan C, it's like, okay, well, you know what? Either A, it's kind of time for us to start prepping now anyway, or get into that prep positioning phase of kind of getting within our recommended range to start prep, or you know what? Okay, you know what? We're still doing good here. Your training is going good. Maybe we go to plan D, E, and F to keep pushing this up, And I think that's kind of also something that's important is probably communication with your coach. The original person that's got your big picture timeline kind of figured out, that was kind of tailor made, kind of for your goals. Don't leave them out of the loop, for much more. Well, shoot, for me, I'm 50 now, so you probably better keep me in the loop about every 3 months. But, keep your coach in the loop so they can kind of keep you on track and make the timelines flexible and give you plan B and plan C and et cetera.
All right. So, yeah, well, I actually got to eat, but it's not because I'm gaining. But yeah, I think we'll talk about this again, because it's I think the one part that, I think everyone thinks like, oh, lean muscular body, and it's going to take lots of dieting to, look the way I want to look, and everyone's okay with that. But, folks forget about the other side, right? The fact that, muscle is an expensive process, right? And like Jeff says, like you need the supply. So yeah, don't be too hard on yourself if you don't nail your first gaining phases. Like, maybe you didn't make it to your gaining weight. Maybe you overshot it, right? Right? It's just like fat loss phases, and you get progressively better with each time you cut down, right? You figure more stuff out. And this goes for even people with coaches, right? Like, our athletes that do the best are the ones that, work with us like over the course of the long run. But absolutely, I definitely say that all of us coaches here, like, we wouldn't have the physiques that we rock these days if it wasn't for those monumental gaining phases. And it wasn't super easy at the start, but we see the benefit in it now, and we encourage you guys to do the same and split as much hair there as you might on the fat loss side of things. So yeah, guys, I'm gonna go eat. You guys should eat as well. Oh, Brad, oh no, we're on fat loss phases. I think you're always okay. All right, okay, eat, but don't eat too much, boys.
Yeah, it's time to go eat. So,
all right,
thank you for your time, Jens. Appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll see you guys here next time.
What's going on, 3DMJers? Eric Helms here. Thanks for listening to our podcast. I just want to take a second to tell you about MASS, Monthly Applications in Strength Sport. This is a monthly research review that I put out with Greg Nuckols, Dr. Mike Zerdos, and Dr. Eric Trexler, where we cover the most up-to-date, peer-reviewed research in the world of strength and physique sport that's directly relevant to your practice as a coach or an athlete. We provide our reviews in written format, but also, since you enjoy our podcast, and audio roundtable reviews where we discuss the research in depth. Finally, we also do video concept reviews where we cover a broader topic in video format for your learning. For fitness professionals, you can take quizzes on mass content and earn continuing education credits for most of the biggest certifying bodies in the fitness industry. If you want to sign up and get a subscription, head over to 3dmusclejourney.com and click on the Products tab. Thanks for your time, and thanks for listening.